Welcome to Fierce Planet Adventures podcast. Today's guest, Stuart Sovatsky, has spent much of his life bringing positive psychology to the world and changing how many think about mental health and spirituality. Receiving its top club scholarship, Stuart was degreed in religion and ethics from Princeton University in 1971 with a thesis on Nietzsche and Advaita. He was initiated into the Lakulish Kripalvanan Pashupata lineage in 1973 with Gurudev Amrit Desai and with Vairagya initiations with the late Vinit Muni in 1992 as his co-translator of Kripalvanan's Hatha Yoga Pradipika commentaries, who mysteriously transmitted tongue-vibrating Nabho Mudra to him in 1977. Continuous to the present day and energizing his spontaneous tapas chanting for 43 years. He was first in the U.S. to bring yoga and kirtan to incarcerated youth and to the homeless mentally ill in the mid-1970s, and was first choice to clinically direct the Ramdas prison ashram, receiving the first federal grant to bring meditation into schools, police departments, and mental health agencies in 1976. He has some 30,000 hours of counseling experience and directed the first spiritual emergence service in the world since 1983. The Kundalini clinic that helped modify psychiatry's diagnostic manual to include spiritual issues and distinguish dissociative disorders from meditative states. His admiration therapy was certified by the Russian government that he has used in transforming over 300 breakup-bound couples and has been awarded over $2 million in grants. A Berkeley mental health clinic named a room after him for 26 years of directorship, including thwarting several suicidal and one homicidal situation. From 1997 to 2000, he was founding consultant for the Oakland $34 million award-winning Sustainable Green City Lofts. Stuart was secretly flown to Slovenia to chant over the dying chair of unaligned nations of the world and to South Africa as the first Caucasian to chant with Sangoma shamans in 2001. And in 2008, he convened a 40-country World Spirituality Conference in India, where the Dalai Lama was Jack Kornfield, the prelate of the Ramakrishna Order and Robert Thurman keynoting. Stuart gave Sanskrit benedictions for Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and presented on Tantra and One World Family. He is the author of Advanced Spiritual Intimacy, Words from the Soul, in Acquisition Review by Harvard University Press, Passions of Innocence, The History of Yoga in America, in the Columbia University Desk Reference on Eastern Religion, and over 40 yoga and clinical articles and chapters, and was interviewed by the science editor for the New York Times on Kundalini Tantra. His academia.com articles are commonly in the top 5% of 23 million. He was chantmaster with San Francisco band Axis Mundi for 20 years, pioneering cave simulating electronica for 130 Burning Man community events, leading kirtan events throughout Europe, India, and the U.S., with numerous World Fusion recordings in the top 20 of thousands at SoundClick. He received the CIIS 40-Year Most Outstanding Alumni Award, was president of the Association for Transpersonal Psychology for 20 years, lead inaugural panelist, 13th International Vedanta Conference, co-convener with Robert Thurman of the Indic Wisdom Roundtable, Columbia University, advisor for George Forrestein's Yoga Research Institute, and for the Johns Hopkins University Psilocybin Study, teacher of teachers for Helen Palmer's Enneagram Institute. In 2020, he will lead Bhakti retreats in Brazil, Romania, Moldova, Spain, Estonia, and Italy. We are incredibly grateful and humbled to have today's guest, Stuart Sovatsky. Welcome, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for seeking me out. I look forward to our talk.
As a married couple, we spend quite a bit of time together adventuring, working, also practicing yoga, meditation, breathing. And I say together, but we're pretty much on separate mats, side by side, but in the same room. After reading your book, Advanced Spiritual Intimacy, it actually opened my mind up to the possibility of how deep relationships can go, or could go. I believe you referred to it as a love that lasts a lifetime, or two or three. Could you tell us more about spiritual intimacy and why that's so important?
Sure, sure. Yeah, thanks for asking. And it's beautiful to be interviewed by a couple, which I've never had before. A couple who are happy. I mean, I talked to lots of couples to help them get as happy as you guys, and yeah, I've been very successful at that, and it traces back to what I'm going to now share with you. And I have to share it like two sides at the same time, because I'll say obvious things, and then we'll think, well, why, since it's so obvious, don't we think this way? Don't we live this way? Why are we not having these kinds of creative, happy marriages that you guys have, and many people do, and many people don't? And so the first point I'll make is so obvious, which is even if it isn't a heterosexual couple, but let's just, for convenience of conversation, talk about the heterosexual couple. Babies come from people like you. And no human who's ever lived on this planet. Now we're getting into, I don't know, trillions of trillions. I don't know the exact math. But we overlook the one fact, or we don't make much of it. And in fact, it gets into very immediately in our modern times into political problems, which is why I want to talk about gender as another topic, because it's all completely off. So let me get back to doing yoga together and why it would be powerful, how it can be way more powerful than, certainly way beyond what the modern yoga teachers are teaching. And like I say, I start with this facts of life, the fact of life, that I'm not here except my mom and dad conceived me. And not only that, their parents, which is now 4 people, conceived them. I have 2 sets of grandparents. And not only that, there's 8 great-grandparents behind them. And behind them is 16 great-great-grandparents. And until you trace back and you have, tens of thousands of grandparents. Now, none of this we think about. It's absurd, if I can be a little bit, brusque about it. It's absurd that we don't even talk about the literal, actual condition of being here on this planet as a human being. We rarely talk in couples, except that, like I say, it becomes politically very hot topic about conceiving children. And but just to start with it, yeah, when you're doing yoga with each other in the same room, you don't have to be having sexual activity. You don't have to be seeking to create a child, but let's call it energy or potential. And even after menopause, it's still on the same dimension of the human body. It's just a different era of the life of the lifetime, where the hormones are in a different state. And that too is way misunderstood in the West. So when you're doing yoga, the energy between the two of you has the potential, whether every couple, you walk by somebody in the street, the potential, this is Darwin's the biggest influence, I think, in Western sociology and biology of all times, and still is, that mate selection is what all the animals, to some degree, at every and then there's the creation of new generations of life. That's Darwin's theory. So I'm just putting this context that everybody thinks about and knows about, but does not fully apply to the intimacy within couples on a daily basis, like the two of you doing yoga together. So all of this, the two of you is the summit of thousands of incarnations preceding you, parents and grandparents, going all the way back. Now, here's the big one: is where does it all end? And some people say there is a God, or gods, or goddesses and gods. They're trying to name some source of life. Where does the great, 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 great grandparent finally, is it just endless? And so it starts to really tap the most ancient, one of them, aspects of what we call spirituality or religion is God, or source of life, or God, goddess, which I believe is the most accurate. You have to have the two gender qualities, the way I describe it, and not the way I describe it. It's the way China, India, Japan, Arab countries, it's all over the world. It's in the Catholic Church. It's everywhere that there's this what they call procreation, not even reproduction. Procreate. You're creating on the half of the universe. You're procreating. You're not. It's not mere reproduction. So that energy is happening in your separate yoga mats, doing things together. And now I'll add in a little bit more. You're the summit of all that evolution, all those. You're both of your lineages going way back. You're their hope, if you could say that. If you have children, I don't remember, but when people have children, they love their children. They see great hopefulness for them in their lives. Well, that's who we are for our parents and all of our ancestors. And many cultures believe that ancestors are aware of us. So if I'm not going to argue too much for that, because I don't know much about it, but I know enough to at least include it from an anthropological perspective that, okay, so there you are on your mats, and within the context that, as I say, is obviously true, it cannot be denied, but we don't ever think that way. So I take that laboring introduction into our consciousness, and now you're doing yoga. Yeah, what is yoga? Yoga, we think of it as a stretching and giving the body deep relaxation. But when I read the text, and I've highly published worldwide and many professional conferences, and not that many people take up my research, at least that I can follow. But what I'm conveying is that yoga is a developmental process. Not merely, what does that mean? Let me not continue to develop that a little bit. Yoga is firstly, in its deepest origin, an extension of embryonic and fetal movement and baby movement, infantile movement. What is all of that? Those are the movements that create the human body. When they use the word Kundalini, it's been cheapened so much that it's laughable. And that conference I did in India was also with the Dalai Lama and Robert Thurman and very famous scholars. Yeah, that was one of my main points, is what happened to yoga. It used to be related to Kundalini, literally the mother. Kundalini, the mother. We don't think it through. What is this mother? Well, one area is gestation. It's inarguable that gestation it takes place in female pregnant bodies where egg and a sperm have met, and then it's I don't have to argue. I'm mapping it out. A new incarnation can begin, and this is etymological meaning, linguistic aspect. It may or may not have a tremendous impact on what I'm sharing with you. But the first moment of a conception is called the zygote, where the egg is fertile. Do you know that the word zygote traces back to Greek and then to Sanskrit? And the Sanskrit word is yogi, which has so you could say union being, the union being of male, female, of sperm and egg. And they can't be separated out. So when you're on the mat, your energies of male, female, your hormones, your pheromones, your sweat, your the love that you feel, the life that you've shared together, day in and day out, for however long you've been together, all of that is reverberating between the two of you. The meaning, you could say, of your relationship, which translates into the pheromones and neurotransmitters in a scientific language. Our bodies, as we know, if you feel fear, they say adrenaline is in your system. But now they also know if you feel love, you will have oxytocin and other chemistries in your system, because there's an interactivity between the hormones and the feeling states. This also is not news. It's fundamental neurophysiology. No one would discount what I just said. But the nuances of emotions, they haven't kind of gotten that heavily into it. Yoga, on the other hand, was once for many, I think more than a few hundred years, was known within the topic of rasa jnana, which rasa is the juices of the body, the hormones of the body. And jnana meaning roughly the yoga, or the way of dealing with, the way of behaving that does something to these rasas. Does what? Alchemy has been one name, the transmuting of these hormones towards what? From whatever fundamental stages or basic stages, more towards the chemistries, literally, of psychedelics, serotonin levels, melatonin, endorphins, all kinds of mood altering and uplifting, and some would say entheogenic chemistries that cause us to be enlightened. But none of this is debatable. That's what I'm kind of saying. Everybody agrees that MD, all the drugs people take, kind of get them high. That's what they call it. And in fact, it launched all this yoga from the 60s. And so rasa jnana is well worth studying, because that's what's happening when you're doing your hatha yoga or whatever breathing practices together, is your hormones are interacting. Your pheromones, which is, let's call it a kind of sweat, in fact, it drives all fertility in every other animal on the planet. When the pheromones radiate, there's what they call mating season. So that's to some degree happening in all couples, and it happens in different and more, I could say, different types of profundity throughout the whole age of a human being. 70-year-old couples, obviously unlikely fertile, but the hormones are the golden age. Gold is, we get the word through the Sanskrit, is oras. That's what the term gold, oras, is in Sanskrit. And we get the word aura, and we get golden aura when you put it together. And so that's the golden years of marriage. I mean, I could go, if we had 25 hours, if we had a month, I could talk to you for 10 hours a day for a month, and you would go, none of what this guy just said is false. None, not one single thing that he has said is even a stretch of a theory. But no, I haven't found scholars. I don't know why. I think somewhat is that you have to have a Kundalini awakening to think this way. It's not real to those people, the scholar. They're just not having an active transformation of their brain and their chemistry and all the rest of it. So they can't think this way. They don't. It's not in their experience. And I won't say too much about the type of yoga that I did personally, but I will say what is happening between the two of you, your question. So your hormones are interacting. No, you're not thinking that way. So any progress that happens, your mind doesn't put it into words in your mind. So it kind of weakens it. That's the strange power of naming things properly. If we don't name it, we don't notice the change, and we go back to the previous mode. Plus what we do put into words, spiritual practice together. I would ask you, but if we had a lot more time, what do you mean by that? And you would say that you feel more in harmony and all of that. Yeah, psychological aspects of life. I would say many couples would say, yeah, they do it and they feel closer together. I'm just revealing the yogic depths and the missed connection with fertility. And here's really going to be a zinger. The deep origins are historically of yoga, relating particularly to Kundalini Yoga, but all yoga, is something called Sahaj, Sahaja, Sahaj Yoga, which means self-arising yoga. And you find it worldwide, this phenomenon of the body having movements that just get generated out of the foundation of the body. It's not thought out, like how the embryo is formed. The embryo doesn't think about it. It just creates an arm or a leg or a head or a gut or a liver or a heart or a brain. This is also, nobody debates what I'm saying. The movements in utero create the human body, orchestrating it. DNA, you could say. And so after birth, I should say, the infant stage, it's continuing at a rapid pace. Babies gain a lot of weight in a short period of time. They're moving and stretching in very quirky ways. No, everybody's seen this. But the fact is, no one has done the claim, which deserves to be made, that those baby movements, infantile movements, fetal movements, those are mother-generated. Kundalini is mother. Asana is the name of these different movements, but that have been so distanced from their source that people now do goat yoga. They do, they hold poses for long periods of time. They do it for stretching. They don't allow this spontaneous, which is Sahaj, like the baby movements. You don't teach a baby how to move. The movements are what we call spontaneous. And you see this in worldwide for, 10,000 years in world religions, called in the academic study of religion, called charismatic religions. And that means there's speaking in tongues, there's shaking, there's what can I say? You're being moved by the spirit. That was where the Quakers, if you've ever heard of the Quakers and the Shakers, that's why they called them Quakers and Shakers for a while. They ran out of knowledge and they suppressed moving. It's funny, the Shakers are now moved to speak, but not moved to move. I think in the history, it's hard to find where they didn't know what to tell people. There was too many movers. But the Shakers, the Quakers were quaking, they were shaking, and you find it in all the different religions, the charismatic religions, the Pentecostals, even Tai Chi, known as Nidan is spontaneous Tai Chi, is like the kind of yoga that I'm now saying. You've never been taught, but it's foundational. It's even deeper than the idea of yoga. It's in utero. It's infant movement. And actually, yeah, when you become 1, 2, 3, we stop moving like that. Some kids don't. Blind kids tend not to because they're not as aware of what they look like. But we get socialized. Socialized means you go to school and you're taught to sit in your seat and not squirm around and 100 other things. And even all kinds of spontaneity can be drained out of people to become a professional. Therapists are trained, I think, even to today, to keep neutral. Not even to cry if be moved to tears. Dance forms are replace the sheer joy of feeling like dancing, like a child when they're jumping up and down. Oh, look at little Susie's dancing. Her legs are going up and down. She doesn't know. We know what that means, that word. A little kid is dancing. They're just ecstatic and their knees are going up and down and they're, look. That's the kind of dancing, that's the kind of yoga that you don't know anything about, that is way bigger than the yoga that's taught today. It's outside of the bounds of even yoga. It's embryology, gestation, charismatic religions, which are worldwide, the spontaneous movement. It is called Sahaj Yoga, and it's well known. And there are ways it's awakened. But so if all this was known to you, I don't know how many years you've done yoga together, let's say 5, if I had known you, I believe that would have been the missing ingredient, because I would have said, try this, try that. And you would be rolling around, you'd be crying, laughing during that hour period. Sometimes you would hug and weep. Sometimes you would hug and cry. Feel like you were conceiving. That's a metaphor. Metaphorically, you'd feel like you were conceiving a child, which is incredibly profound. I hope we can all agree that that's a good enough word. That creating life is not like baking a cake. It's a big deal, and none of us would be here without it. So if that's what's happening on your mats, metaphorically, or you could say hormonally, you're within that realm, you're going to be a very powerful couple. And look at how powerful you already are. So you're the perfect couple I wish that I had known, because you would be like, have the map that fits the life and couplehood that you already are in. And if you multiply it by 10,000, I kind of tried to map out my impact in the world after 50 years, which I mean, the number was big, but it's really nothing. It's probably 1 million people. Probably my publications and conferences and for 50 years all over the world, and being on boards and working with the head of the MacArthur Foundation and the president of a country. I have an elaborate background that we didn't put in my intro. So yeah, even if having impact on 1 million people, if I had it at this level we're now talking about, there could possibly be 50 million people and 20 million couples, and they were all living the way I'm living, and they would be, some of them young enough, conceiving children, and that'd be a different topic. How children are raised differently when the male female know each other is this interactive rapport, and that the maturation is lifelong, at a physical level, not just at a psychological level. Your glands are changing their chemistries, so the age 60 to 80, you're in the golden years, and your chemistry briefly is this, I use not knowing if it's helpful or not, but psychedelic. Your chemistry is entheogenic. It's like you've taken the love drug. It's like you've taken the enlightenment drug that launched all of this, the LSD drug. And then if you get rid of the drug aspect, all that you have is the state and what I call puberty. This is the most obvious contribution, or to me, it's just needs to be made, is to call enlightenment a puberty that happens the whole lifetime through the spine. Freud ended in most ideas of puberty ends at about age 12, 13, 14, and then you're fertile. It goes way beyond that ordinary fertility, which has been cheapened as well. It has no connection to thousands of generations behind us, and for political reasons, the very narrow and highly, the word is iatrogenic. The theory itself is making our world very sick. Because there's a limited understanding of not just the couplehood interactivity and the kind of yoga that you could be experiencing, and the maturation over decades. And then if millions of people, or let's say the 50,000, 1 million, however many, that if I could have influenced by this point in my life, it would be way out. It would be very self-evident, but I didn't do that. So it's kept as a somewhat, I talk on small podcasts instead. But the culmination of this development that I'm mapping out is a pineal gland puberty. Everybody knows this in cross-cultural religion. The golden flower in Taoism, the sixth chakra, where thine eye becomes single in the Old Testament revelations. The third eye, this is the pineal and the hypothalamus, where the pleasure center is so-called. Hypothalamus means little wedding chamber, where the male and female Shiva Shakti meet. It's endless. I could talk, this is a rant for 10 seconds. I've talked to the most famous people in my field but it just doesn't click as much with them. So nothing dramatic has happened like I would have hoped. But this puberty, now you get a physiological basis for what we call spiritual state. And it should be that we are more effective in life, that we're more loving in life. That's what a saint kind of is or was. We would be functioning like that massively. And I didn't realize what it was happening, but so many miracles, I call them kind of miracles, because I prevented numerous suicides and a couple murders and put on big events and went out of my field. And I co-founded the largest green project in America at the time. What was it? $34 million project. It's not my field, architecture, green design, and raising money. But I had so much ethical credibility that people were willing to do something never been done before in the late 1990s. It exists. Green City Lofts. I was able to do anything I wanted, and I'm retiring now. But I think it all is proof that people like me, it's not that rare, but you can track it. When you're people who are successful in multiple areas and have new things to say. Gopi Krishna connected this to, if you know who he was a big writer, at least, about Kundalini awakening. He said it was the foundation of genius. The Kundalini was foundation of genius. So yeah, we would all be functioning at a much higher level. And let me stop for now, because I want to hear back from you guys. But the topics we listed, they're going to be interconnected. But let me just stop because of keep the focus with my answer to the question you raised.
Yeah, for me, what I hear you saying, and hopefully I can paraphrase this correctly, is that as a Western society, just individually on the individual person level, as well as maybe the clinical, the professional, scientific level, we've just discarded the spiritual, or we won't recognize it for whatever reason. It's just we have this separation of spiritual and clinical, or spiritual and intellectual, and they're really not separate. They're intermingled. They're part of the same whole, or part of the same thing. Is that correct?
I wish it was that simple, because that critique has been around, I don't know, maybe a long time, but in a strong way the last 40 or 50 years, to reintegrate the spiritual in the material. It's much worse than that, in my opinion. That we don't even look at the science as very far ahead of what it is claiming. We don't, like the hormones, the endocrinological science. There's a discovery of oxytocin, where a mother feels love, and the oxytocin levels in utero of the fetus go up, and the moms go up, and they go up and down together. There should be 50 books about that. There should be $25 million of research money behind that. There should be wondering about, then you could connect it with yogic texts, which I know the most about. Like, okay, oxytocin. In Sanskrit, I would say madhu is the correlate term. It means honey, but not honey only like a sweetness, but love. And so and what then they get into is the sharing. We call it wet kissing. It depending if you're in a romantic mood, it can sound quite beautiful. But we don't think of the hormone transfer of brain chemistries that are in this saliva. The one research that we have done is on salivary immunoglobulin A. You probably never heard of it. Mm-hmm. I've known about it since 82, because I'm interested in that stuff. So that's 38 years. Heart Math Institute, I think they're in Stanford, California, did the original research, or at least they published it. And it came up recently again with mindfulness, because that's a trademark name. Millions of people do mindfulness. And so they tested saliva of people, and they found at elevated levels of salivary immunoglobulin A. which is, and obviously it's a immune system boosting hormone. And back in the day, the research was about watching videos of Mother Teresa. And the viewers' salivary hormone was way up because they would see the saint and their hearts would open, you could say. This is 38-year-old research. Mm-hmm. I published on it in my dissertation. But yeah, if I was famous or made myself famous or something, we would have hundreds of studies, thousands of studies of salivary immunoglobulin. And we would call it MADU. We wouldn't call it necessarily just the scientific name. We don't live our life. We don't say salivary kissing. We say wet kissing. And then if you get into the sexual language, we use vagina and penis, although it's probably rarely used in couplehood. So if you start to integrate the languages, let me not say language, the theories, you update the theories in science. And we're in, this primitive level on one hormone in particular, salivary immunoglobulin A. It reduces violence. That was the mindfulness study, because I was writing a book about this murder that I thwarted. And how did I do it? Harvard got interested in it. I presented it in Europe. Nobody could figure out how did I do this. This is during the heyday of the gun problem, which we're sort of still in. How did this guy thwart just by talking, where everybody wanted to send this guy to jail? And so, the science behind salivary immunoglobulin A recently was related to gun violence, or I should say, anger towards violence. Meditation helps because it increases salivary immunoglobulin A, and it relates to being less violent. But the deeper thing, but for couplehood, is that it can be shared. And now when it's shared and people actually love each other, and this is another angle on spirituality, we're God and goddesses. You create life, that's what God is called. In the beginning was God. And he created the heaven and earth and Adam and Eve, and they created Cain and Abel and Lilith and all this stuff. That's Western biblical, and it has its creation myths all over the world, different cultures. And so when you exchange salivary, it's so weird, MADU, let's call it, in deep kissing, it's far more powerful than sexual intercourse, in my opinion. So now we have the lack of understanding what they call sacred sexuality in the so-called hippie New Age circles about yoga. They don't know what I just said. They don't know Pariyanga, for example. Pariyanga is the yogic term for couple yoga or sexual yoga. They don't even know the key word to their whole, what they're bringing to the world. They call it Tantra. But I published this over and over, and none of them ever know the real word. Pariyanga is a South Indian term for it. So the problem of spirituality being outside or not connected to the sciences and other aspects of life, it's way entangled of a problem. The science is there. There wasn't enough money on those two, and I could give you many more discoveries, but we don't have that much time. If money was there, a lot of problems are like that. Science discovers something, and 50 years, 100 years later, the electric car is invented. 30 years later, the inventor knew. Copernicus knew the sun was in the center of our planetary system, not the Earth. He waited 40 years because he knew he would be thrown out of the Catholic Church and out of every other institution for heresy. There's many ways. It's this complex topic of how come religion and the other disciplines of knowledge don't interact well. And I'm kind of shotgunning my answer. But the big one is money. So you put money behind what I just said, and people start, and then the map, You give them the map that when you're kissing, it's beautiful, you love each other. But what if you start to be able to use worship each other?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Fascinating.
how is Andy different as you think I'm actually worshiping him? He is a God. He is a human being God. That's what Christ showed, a human being God. We worship a human being God. We could say worship Buddha, worship other saints. That's politics of theology. They don't let that go out very far, but that's the only reason. And likewise, you kissing Casey, she's a goddess, and I don't mean the New Age goddess, which I think is a very shallow term. People don't have to change much; they just have to kind of admit they're a goddess. But this is where what do gods and goddesses do? They don't worship themselves, and that is a narcissistic aspect that is in my field of spiritual psychology and this kind of thinking. Is we worship our own enlightenment. The devotional practices in India, in terms of bhakti yoga, that's the yoga where enlightenment is other people look amazing because our eyes look this way and our ears go this way. This closing the eyes, and that's where it all happens when you close yourself off from the world by closing your senses down. That's just one area of enlightenment. But of course, in the West, it's everywhere because we have it. Only 5%, 6%, 8% has been translated from the Indo-Tibetan archive, but we think we know even more than they know with our 6%. And we don't even know we only know 6%. So you open up all this, and then you add in this theological modification that it isn't yoga. Where man and woman worship each other is the play of the divine, is in their scriptures. Man and woman worship each other as the play of the divine. And I've met many Indian couples, such as you guys. They work together, they have family life together, and they do worship each other. They touch each other's feet. They anoint each other's foreheads as if God and goddess. And so now you're kissing, and the hormones that not just go with attraction or pleasure or love, but worship, those hormones, which I have tried to prepare you for, they are such hormones. And that's why neurotransmitters, that's why people say, oh my God, I have a new feeling. It's because a new hormone or endocrine secretion entered their bloodstream, and LSD, would make people's chemistry go off the charts with serotonin, which is wakefulness. They go, oh my God, I'm awake, and so here, when you're kissing and you start to worship each other, the salivary immunoglobulin A is way higher than it was when we were just loving each other. And when you feel worship, like you're in the presence of a god and a goddess, it gets more complex. You have to feel that somebody's worshiping you. And that's not so simple. I find people are not even that good at knowing that they're loved. I say, help many divorces go away by having people talk about what they love about each other, because people don't talk about what they love about each other. And then they start talking about that they don't feel their needs are being met, and nobody knows why. And I just say, well, let's talk about what you love about each other. Then they stop wanting a divorce because that was the problem. And then they start complaining. Nobody likes to be around complaining about them. And they complain about complaining, and then they can't get out, so they get spend $10,000-$50,000 on a divorce. I've been for 50 years reversing, I don't know, hundreds in person of divorces, and maybe tens of thousands of couples extending their relationship, because I've noticed this sharing of positives way beyond the average, way beyond positive psychology. So this kind of kissing, you have to realize you're being worshipped, and you cry. You've never been worshipped. You realize this person loves you more than you were ever aware of. That's a huge concept. That means you've been missing out on your couplehood. It's not because of your childhood trauma, which my profession makes everything about. Everything's about limiting you based on your childhood. That is completely overdone. Not by, I say, a factor of 10, if not worse. Makes many people, made them worse and worse and worse. this grinding over and over childhood trauma, and never wondering about how challenging it is to grow. If you become more aware that you're being, or you feel like you're being more loving, it's not so simple. And then the other person feeling that they got it, that, wow, I felt like you loved me more. And you say, yeah, that's what I felt in that moment. And now I feel like I'm worshiping you as a male being that creates half the genetic material in semen that can make life. And I can't do that. And likewise, I'm worshiping a woman who can gestate and create ovum. And I can't do that. Without that, everything ends. I don't know the pandemic shows people first time in a global way, everything can end. And so but if you don't reproduce, everything will end just as well. And so that means, yeah, you want to find a vaccine that's going to change everything, if it's a good, healthy vaccine. But so we should realize, yeah, that when you're worshiping each other, there's a reason. It's not shallow New Age worship and gods and goddess. It's because of procreation, fertility, and many other things. But let me just stay on that one theme. And you're weeping because you're actually with somebody in an erotic way. And Eros is way bigger, includes Hatha yoga practice in the broader approaches to sexuality than Freud gave us, which was based on a teenage puberty. That's what he thought sex was. But Jung, we had a little bit of a glimpse of what I'm talking about, that, yeah, couples doing Hatha yoga is a sexual activity. Kissing the way that I'm talking about. And of course, there's the sex, intercourse itself. But I'm just staying with this kissing thing because, yeah, you're being worshipped. Now you're taking in the heightened saliva, and it goes into your body. It interacts, and your salivary immunoglobulin gets higher because of the input of your partner. And that doesn't end just one round. It goes on, and that's what alchemy means. It keeps getting heightened and heightened and heightened until it's finally, you're aware this is the same as LSD. This is not just feeling good. You look out your window and you think the sun is like the ancient god Sol, and the trees are Mother Nature, and life is a miracle, and we're in the Garden of Eden. As you may know, there's a kind of a controversial book about John F. Kennedy with, I can't remember her name, Mary somebody who he was having a bit of an affair with while the president. And she was also a girl, Leary. And so the story was she gave JFK LSD when they would be together. And one of those times led to him wanting to end the war in Vietnam, because he saw that, like all the hippies of that time, that war is a choice, and it just keeps perpetuating itself. And if you perpetuated something else, like love one another, that's an old teaching. Mm-hmm. And I did that with couples. I would say, murderers love one another. They stop murdering. They love one another. It's not a close call. People would like love more than divorce. And all I would do is get them to talk about it for 10 or 20 more minutes than any of my colleagues. 50,000 of my colleagues would not have their clients talk about how they love each other for more than 5 or 10 minutes, more than, I don't know, certainly not 20 and 30 and 40 minutes, to where the chemistry changes. Chemistry changes in your body when you get to a certain level or a certain duration of complimenting. So, when you're exchanging these madhu, you're getting high off of each other. And then you really do see that you're God and goddess. Everything I said becomes vivid, that you're here because of your parents and your grandparents, and it traces back to the source. Because LSD helps us to wake up. And serotonin levels are changed by this exchange of salivary immunoglobulin A and oxytocin. The chemistry is, like I say, the science is already there. They don't need spirituality. It's already there. They've tested pregnant women, and the oxytocin levels go up, and both at the same time. Just nobody extrapolates, and no money comes forward to fund the research. And otherwise, yeah, so you're getting higher and higher off of each other. It doesn't go away when you go and do your daily work. In fact, you're cleaning a house. A house becomes holy. It's a temple. You're going to live there, maybe die there. It's profound. So everywhere you look, the ordinary becomes profound. Where did this drug come from? From salivary immunoglobulin A.
That's amazing. There's so much to unpack here. Wow. I guess I have a couple things that popped up for me when you were speaking. And with regard to married couples, you had mentioned, divorce, and just getting the married couples who are going through a tumultuous time in their marriage, getting them to talk about what they love about each other and how they love each other just a little bit longer than the average therapist is the key, or is a crux, or is integral to getting them to stay together. I think in your book, if I'm remembering this correctly, you had mentioned separation, or being not in the terms of separating as a couple, but just being distanced apart. So we recently just I spent a week with my family. Casey stayed here, and in just that time that we were apart, the feelings of missing her and loving her and wanting to be with her right then and there became more profound for me. And when I used to travel all the time for my previous career, like weekly days, even a couple weeks at a time, it just became immense. So I think I'm trying to ask a question in there, but so how does that relate to what you're referring to, you're talking about?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, thanks for stretching our conversation in this direction. Yeah, in Sanskrit or yoga, this is called V-yoga. It's a term you've never heard, right? You've heard asana, kundalini, many different terms, but the term for missing, you've never heard it before. And I'll tell you, no one that's teaching yoga, or maybe a small percentage, ever heard of it either. And so they're deprived of one of the most profound aspects of yoga, called V-yoga, which is the yoga of missing. We don't have a yoga of missing, but what you described was your own experience, which it shows you love someone in a special ways even more because they're not nearby. You miss them. Many times people become frustrated. They don't know how to miss. They don't even use the word. I can say, they say, I feel so, I don't like this. She's not there. He's not there. He's on the road all the time. It's a complaint. It's the exact opposite of what you're describing, what you've opened up with, saying, I feel love for her in all these, deeper, ways. Yeah, it's paradoxical. It feels like a pain of missing, they can't say. But pain is a very poor word. It's like when you hit your finger with a hammer, it's pain. This is not the same kind of pain. So you really shouldn't use the word. It's very confusing. It's longing. It's missing. And now a huge area starts possibly opening up. What if you call and the phone's busy and you're both calling each other at the same time? Or you have dreams of each other, and you talk about them. There's other channels that mysteries can be happening like that, like mysteries, just inexplicable coincidence, stuff like that, or just knowing. This is what I do a lot of. I did a lot of it because I worked in the San Francisco area. People were working apart, being apart, different reasons, days at a time, weeks, is they had to get really good at missing. And so when you are there, and you see your partner crying, I mean, I could see it. I don't know if you can see Casey's face, but when you described it, she was very moved, and so the tears, the lacrimose secretion is a very different kind of tears when you're being loved and missed. And so not only that, when you see those, you say, I really miss Casey, and her eyes fill up with the tearful being loved feeling, which she's very, her system is very integrated in her eye. They change immediately with the feeling that she feels. Every muscle in her face reveals how she feels. Am I right, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm making it up, right?
No, you
So
nailed it.
when you tell her that you miss her, that's how she looks. And guess what? You can now maybe see on Andy's face, his style is different. It goes inward. He's absorbed. He's touched. And you can feel that his depth, that it blows him away to even think about you, being moved by him missing you. And now you can see on Casey's face, she's aware of you're not displaying your emotionality in the same way. It goes in, I would say. Mm-hmm. You trace Andy towards his heart space, and you feel how much he feels about how you look, Casey, when you feel missed. And now when you see Casey on the laptop, that's how she feels, knowing that seeing it makes a difference to you, that it makes a difference to her, that you miss her. Now, the language is hard to follow, the missing, of being missed, and who's aware of what. But you get the logic. It's like ping pong. It goes back and forth about merely talk. And you're not even in the same room talking about missing each other and seeing, you do this, which I did. You start to, with couples, you start to make missing into one of the most profound modes of contact you could ever imagine. It's poetic. It's in all the poetry of the world. Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Juliet is the sun. It's everywhere. But my profession, I believe, is so. I'll make a strong statement. I hope you get some response. I'd like to go one-on-one with people who disagree with me, because I don't think it's possible. But this is a little bit of an opinion. Is my profession is ultimately very cynical. Yeah, they don't know much about spirituality. They don't know much about romantic love. They're not interested in romantic love. They're interested in self-preservation and having strong boundaries. And not because romantic love is, they don't know how it works, so they fear it, that it only ends in disaster. And that's they don't read my books. If they did, they don't believe it. I don't know. They could read all the world's poetic literature. They could listen to like thousands of love songs and ignore them, that they're not real. Yeah. Missing is in all kinds of country music, and it's not fake. They're not just trying to sell records. These people really missed their person. And you know what it's like. And you're perfect. I mean, it's great that I have a couple interviewing. So V-Yoga becomes union through missing. And that's just the beginning. Like I say, this is a topic of, for sure, 40 hours. And you can only do 2 hours at a time before people, can't get fuzzed out. But it's like calculus. If you said, well, tell me what mathematics is all about. So, well, there's adding, subtracting, and then there's calculus. And they say, oh, okay. We go, wait a second, calculus takes like 5 years to even understand it. And after that, then what? Laplace transforms and this kind of math and 10-dimensional geometry. And, it's an endless field. And so V-Yoga, the yoga of missing, is not even on the map. In fact, it's pathologized. You don't want to miss somebody. You want to be whole and complete unto yourself. They're not mutually exclusive. That's another problem. We have mutually exclusive modes. How can the opposites be both necessary? Well, I'll teach you how that happens outside of ordinary logic. It's multivariant logic. Yeah, there's lots of variables that can fit together, because they do fit together in real life. So yeah, it's a big area, and you can cry in each other's arms when you reunite. Let me just conclude my answer. And now, what kind of hug is that? It's not a hug of, it's a hug of reunion. But it's not missing, it's having. And now the hormones, and hugging is a huge deal, obviously. The energies, and lasts for more, if you hug for more than 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, man, the nervous systems are completely commingled. The blood is changed, the hormones are changed. People look younger, obviously, that nobody can ignore. everything has changed. And when a reunion has occurred, yeah, you really are happy to see each other. That's normal. Oh, I'm so happy to see you. It's been so long. And you run. In the old days, you could go to the airport, to the landing, to the gateway, and you'd see the beautiful scenes.
Yeah.
You'd envy the couples, back in 20 years ago, whenever it was, and yeah, I would love that, be at the gate, because that moment is like magic.
It is, absolutely. Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next time for part 2 of our chat with Dr. Stuart Sovatsky. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and give us some feedback to let us know what you want to hear about. Until next time, live fiercely.